There's a phenomenon in modern culture that blurs the line between fiction and reality in the most disturbing way possible. It started as a simple internet post, a creative writing challenge, a single image that someone edited in Photoshop. And from that moment, it spiraled into something far larger than anyone anticipated, something that captured the imagination of millions, something that inspired real violence, something that proved that fiction, when it takes root in the collective consciousness, can become terrifyingly real. We're talking about Slenderman. And this isn't just a story about an internet creepypasta or a modern urban legend. This is the story of how an entirely fictional character born from an internet forum became so culturally pervasive that it influenced the minds of vulnerable people. This is the story of how imagination became obsession, how obsession became delusion, and how delusion led to real violence, real crimes, real victims. This is the story of how something that doesn't exist can feel so tangible, so present, so undeniably real that people will commit acts of violence in its name. By the end of this video, you'll understand not just what Slenderman is, but how something entirely fictional can worm its way into the collective consciousness of millions. You'll understand how internet culture can create phenomena that feel more real than reality itself. You'll understand how vulnerable minds can lose the distinction between imagination and truth, and you'll understand how that loss of distinction led to one of the most disturbing crimes in modern American history. Welcome back to the channel. I'm your host, and today we're diving into one of the most complex and disturbing phenomena in internet history. This is a story about creativity, about obsession, about the power of narrative, and about the terrifying consequences when fiction becomes reality. Let's begin. In 2009, on a paranormal website called Something Awful, there was a forum thread. The challenge was simple: create the most disturbing paranormal images possible using Photoshop. The thread was called Create Paranormal Images. It was designed to be a creative exercise, a test of Photoshop skills, a competition to see who could create the most unsettling imagery. People submitted creepy pictures, ghosts with hollow eyes, monsters with impossible proportions, creatures that seemed to exist in the uncanny valley between human and animal, demonic figures, twisted versions of reality, things designed to unsettle and frighten, things designed to make viewers feel that inexplicable sense of dread that comes from seeing something that shouldn't exist. But one submission stood out from all the others. A user named Victor Surge, whose real name was Eric Knudsen, posted a black and white photograph. In it, a tall, impossibly thin figure stood in the background behind a group of adults. The figure had no face, no features, just a blank expanse of white where a face should be. It wore a dark suit, and it stood perfectly still, watching, always watching. The image was disturbing in a way that most of the others weren't. It wasn't grotesque, it wasn't overtly monstrous, it was subtle. It was the kind of image that made you uncomfortable without being able to fully articulate why. It was the kind of image that stuck with you, that you thought about later, that you saw in your peripheral vision for days afterward. Below the image, Victor Surge wrote, "We didn't want to let them go." The phrase was haunting. It was vague. It suggested a story without explaining it. It created questions without providing answers. What didn't they want to let go? Who was they? Who was the figure in the background? He posted another image. Same setting, different angle. A tall, impossibly thin figure in a dark suit. No face standing in the background. Same caption. "We didn't want to let them go." Then another and another. Each image showed the same featureless figure appearing in photographs with groups of people. Old photographs, photographs that looked authentic, photographs that looked like they could be real, like they could be actual historical documents, like they could be evidence of something that had existed for a very long time. Victor Surge began creating a narrative around these images. He claimed these were historical photographs, evidence of something that had been stalking people, particularly children, for centuries. Something that had no name, something that couldn't be named, something that existed outside the normal rules of reality. He called it Slenderman. The original post described Slenderman as a tall, impossibly thin figure in a dark suit with no face. He could allegedly stretch his arms to inhuman lengths. He left no evidence of his presence except in photographs where he appeared in the background. He took people, children primarily. He took them and they were never seen again, and worst of all, he was always there, always watching, always present. You just couldn't see him until he appeared in a photograph, until it was too late. Victor Surge wrote stories to accompany the images, stories about children going missing without explanation, stories about families finding old photographs and discovering that Slenderman had been present in them all along, growing closer with each image, getting nearer, becoming more defined, stories about a presence that couldn't be explained through any rational lens, a presence that defied logic and reason. The stories were deeply unsettling because they suggested that Slenderman had always been there, that he wasn't a new threat, that he had been stalking humanity for centuries, that he might be in your family's old photographs, that he might be in your home right now, that you might not see him until it's too late, and people became obsessed. Within weeks, the forum thread exploded with activity. Other users began adding their own stories, their own theories about Slenderman's origins, their own evidence in the form of images and narratives. They created an entire mythology around this fictional character. The community began calling themselves the Slenderman Mythos Community. They wrote thousands of stories, they created hundreds of images, they built an entire fictional universe with its own rules, its own lore, its own internal logic. The mythos expanded, other creators began contributing. They created fictional organizations dedicated to tracking Slenderman and protecting the public. They created the Slenderman Mythos Archives, a fictional repository of all documented encounters with Slenderman. They created detailed histories. They wrote academic papers in character. They built a fictional world so detailed, so internally consistent, and so well documented that it began to feel real. But here's what made Slenderman different from other internet creepypastas and urban legends. Here's what made it truly dangerous. It felt authentic. The images looked like real photographs. The stories were detailed and interconnected. The mythology was vast and compelling and seemed to have historical depth. And millions of people, particularly young people, teenagers, and children who grew up on the internet, became genuinely convinced that Slenderman might actually exist. The obsession spread beyond the original Something Awful forum. Fan fiction exploded across the internet. Fan art proliferated on image boards and social media. YouTube channels dedicated to Slenderman received millions of views. Content creators began producing their own Slenderman content. Some created fictional found footage videos claiming to document encounters with Slenderman. Others created short horror films. Others created detailed lore videos analyzing the mythology. Slenderman became a massive cultural phenomenon. He became a meme. He became a shared cultural touchstone that millions of people recognized and discussed. People created video games based on him. They made elaborate short films. They created entire universes of interconnected stories that spanned years of fictional history. The Slenderman mythos expanded far beyond what Victor Surge had originally created. Other creators took the basic concept and ran with it in new directions. They created fictional proxies, people who were marked by Slenderman who served him, who committed acts of violence in his name. They created the Operator, another entity that existed alongside Slenderman. They created elaborate mythologies about Slenderman's origins. Was he an alien, a demon, a creature from another dimension, an incarnation of something ancient and evil? The community debated these questions endlessly. They created complex timelines. They referenced each other's work. They built a vast, interconnected fictional universe that rivaled major fantasy series in terms of complexity and scope. And millions of young people, particularly teenagers aged 12 to 18, became immersed in this world. They spent hours reading stories on creepypasta websites. They watched Slenderman-related videos on YouTube. They created fan content. They analyzed theories about Slenderman's nature and origins. They discussed encounters in online forums. And as they did, the line between fiction and reality began to blur in their minds. Because Slenderman wasn't just a creature that appeared in old photographs. He became a real presence in the minds of his followers. He became something they believed in, something they feared, something that felt undeniably real even though it was entirely fictional. For some people, particularly those struggling with mental health issues, Slenderman became more real than reality itself. By 2012, Slenderman had achieved complete cultural saturation. He was everywhere. Video games like Slender the 8 Pages became viral sensations that millions of people played. The game was deceptively simple. You walk through a dark forest at night. You have a flashlight. Your goal is to find 8 pages scattered throughout the forest. And the entire time, Slenderman is stalking you, getting closer, getting nearer. If he finds you, the game ends. You die. The game was terrifying. Players reported genuine fear while playing. Some players reported experiencing actual panic attacks. Some players reported sleep disturbances after playing. Some reported anxiety for days afterward. Some reported seeing Slenderman-like figures in their peripheral vision for weeks after playing. The game was so effective at creating fear that it became a shared cultural experience. Playing Slender, the 8 Pages became a rite of passage for a generation of young people. YouTube channels dedicated to Slenderman received billions of views combined. Channels like Marble Hornets, which created a fictional found footage series about a cameraman named Jay who was being stalked by a mysterious figure he called the Operator, which was clearly Slenderman, became cultural phenomena. The series was incredibly well produced. It blurred the lines between fiction and reality so effectively that many viewers were genuinely convinced that what they were watching was real, that it was actual found footage, that it was documentation of a real haunting. The comment sections of these videos were filled with viewers who weren't sure if what they were watching was real. Some viewers reported believing that marble hornets was real documentation for years. Some viewers tried to contact the creators to warn them that they were in danger. Some viewers experienced genuine psychological distress from watching the series. Slenderman merchandise appeared in stores and online, clothing with Slenderman imagery, figurines and toys, art prints, posters, video games, books. He became a mainstream cultural icon. He became as recognizable as any major film monster. He became part of the cultural vocabulary. But as the phenomenon grew, something darker was happening beneath the surface. In the minds of vulnerable people, particularly children and teenagers struggling with mental health issues, social isolation, or a weakened grip on reality, Slenderman began to feel real, more than real. He became an obsession, he became a presence, he became something that commanded loyalty and obedience. For some people, he became a voice in their head, a compulsion, a force that seemed to demand action. Online communities formed around Slenderman, subreddits, Discord servers, forums on obscure websites, communities where young people discussed their encounters with Slenderman, communities where they shared theories about his origins and his powers, communities where they reinforced each other's beliefs that Slenderman was real, that he was watching them, that he was real and present and dangerous. These communities sometimes became echo chambers. When someone shared a belief that Slenderman was real, other members would validate that belief. They would share their own stories of encounters. They would discuss sightings. They would analyze footage and images looking for evidence of Slenderman's presence. The collective energy of the community reinforced the belief that Slenderman was real. And in some cases, these communities became something far more sinister. They became places where vulnerable young people were encouraged to believe that Slenderman demanded obedience, that he demanded sacrifice, that he demanded violence. Some online spaces developed a mythology where serving Slenderman was a noble goal, where becoming a proxy for Slenderman, a human servant who acted on his behalf, was something to aspire to. This mythology of the proxy was particularly dangerous. The idea that a person could be chosen by Slenderman to serve him, to do his bidding, to commit acts of violence in his name. This idea found fertile ground in the minds of lonely, isolated, mentally ill teenagers who felt that they had been chosen for something, who felt that they had a purpose, who felt that they were special because Slenderman had selected them. This is where the story of Slenderman transforms from a fascinating internet phenomenon into something genuinely disturbing and dark. This is where fiction became reality in the most literal and violent sense. This is where an imaginary creature became the justification for real violence against real people. On May 31st, 2014, in Waukesha, Wisconsin, two girls went into the woods near a park called Merrill Park. Their names were Geyser and Anissa Weier. They were both 12 years old. They were best friends. They had been inseparable since elementary school. They were normal kids in many respects. They went to school. They had families. They had other friends. But they were also both deeply immersed in Slenderman mythology. They had spent months, possibly years, reading Slenderman stories on Creepypasta websites. They watched Slenderman videos on YouTube. They discussed Slenderman theories and lore. They analyzed encounters. They drew fan art. They created fiction. They lived in the Slenderman mythos. And over time, the line between their fictional interests and their grip on reality had begun to blur. Both girls had a history of mental health struggles. Geyser had been diagnosed with early onset schizophrenia. She had experienced symptoms of psychosis. She had reported hearing voices. She had experienced delusions. Anissa Weier had shown signs of emotional disturbance and depression. She had experienced suicidal ideation. Both girls were vulnerable. Both girls were susceptible to losing the distinction between fiction and reality. At some point, immersed in the Slenderman mythos, both girls came to believe that Slenderman was real. They came to believe that he was watching them. They came to believe that he had chosen them. They came to believe that they had been marked as his proxies, as his servants. And they came to believe that in order to prove their loyalty to him, in order to demonstrate that they were worthy of being his proxies, they had to commit an act of violence. They had to kill someone. On that day in May, they lured their friend Payton Leutner into the woods under the pretense of playing hide and seek. Payton was also 12 years old. She was friends with both Morgan and Anissa. She trusted them. She had no reason to fear them. Once they were deep in the woods, away from the park, away from witnesses, away from help, Morgan and Anissa attacked Payton with a knife. They stabbed her 19 times. They stabbed her in the arms, in the legs, in the chest, in the abdomen. They stabbed her with ferocity and determination. Payton fought back. She tried to defend herself. She tried to escape. But she was outmatched, 2 girls against 1, and the 2 girls seemed possessed by purpose, driven by a belief that they had to do this, that Slenderman demanded it. When they stopped stabbing, Payton was bleeding profusely. She was in critical condition, but she managed to crawl out of the woods. She managed to flag down a passing cyclist. The cyclist called 911. An ambulance arrived. Payton was rushed to the hospital. She survived. She had wounds on her arms, her torso, her legs. She had lost significant blood. She would carry physical and psychological scars for the rest of her life, but she survived. When questioned by police, Morgan and Anissa confessed immediately. They didn't deny what they had done. They explained exactly what happened, and they explained why they did it. Morgan Geyser said she believed that Slenderman had chosen her to be his proxy. She said she believed that in order to prove her loyalty to him, she had to commit a murder. She said she believed that if she didn't kill Payton, Slenderman would kill her entire family. She said she thought Slenderman was real. She said she believed he lived in the woods near Waukesha. She said she had seen him. Anissa Weier said similar things. She said she believed Slenderman was real. She said she had become obsessed with the Slenderman mythology. She said she thought the attack was necessary. She said she believed she and Morgan were destined to serve Slenderman as proxies. Both girls were charged with attempted first-degree homicide. Both girls were tried. Both girls were convicted. Morgan Geyser was tried as an adult due to the severity of the crime. She was found guilty of attempted first-degree homicide. She was sentenced to 40 years in prison. She is currently incarcerated at Taishida Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. Anissa Weier was tried as a minor. She was found guilty of attempted second-degree homicide. She was sentenced to 25 years in juvenile detention with the possibility of release at age 51 if she is found to be no longer a threat. She was later transferred to an adult correctional facility as she reached adulthood. Both girls are still incarcerated. Both girls have since expressed remorse for their actions. Both girls have been diagnosed with serious mental health conditions that contributed to their behavior. Morgan Geyser has schizophrenia. Anissa Weier has been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and depression. Both girls have spent years in psychiatric treatment. Both girls have participated in therapy. Both girls have come to recognize that Slenderman is not real, that their belief in Slenderman was a symptom of their mental illness, that they were not chosen by a fictional entity to commit murder, that they were victims of their own psychological conditions, exacerbated by obsession with a fictional narrative. But the damage had been done. Payton Leutner carries the scars, physical scars from the 19 stab wounds, psychological scars from being attacked by her friends. The incident has followed her for the rest of her life. She has given interviews about her experience. She has spoken about the ongoing trauma. She's become an advocate for mental health awareness and responsible internet culture. The case shocked the nation. How could something that started as internet fiction lead to real violence? How could an imaginary creature inspire actual crimes? How could two 12-year-old girls become so detached from reality that they attempted to murder their friend? How could fiction become so real in someone's mind that it overrode the basic human instinct against harming another person? The answer is complex and multifaceted. It involves the vulnerability of adolescence. It involves the power of online communities to reinforce false beliefs. It involves the psychological impact of immersive fictional narratives. It involves the particular susceptibility of certain individuals, those with pre-existing mental health conditions, to losing the distinction between fiction and reality. It involves the internet's ability to amplify and accelerate obsession. Adolescence is a particularly vulnerable period for developing mental health conditions. The brain is still developing. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for judgment, impulse control, and distinguishing between reality and fantasy, doesn't fully mature until the mid-20s. Teenagers are naturally susceptible to obsession. Their emotions are intense. Their sense of self is still forming. Their social world feels all-consuming. Add to that the particular vulnerabilities of social isolation, depression, schizophrenia, and other mental health conditions, and you have a recipe for dangerous delusion. When a vulnerable teenager becomes obsessed with a fictional narrative that feels real, that is reinforced by online communities, that provides a framework for understanding their psychological symptoms, the line between fiction and reality can collapse entirely. Morgan Geyser's schizophrenia manifested in adolescence. She heard voices, she experienced delusions, and these symptoms could feel very much like communication from an external entity. If you're hearing voices and you're immersed in a narrative about a fictional creature that controls people and demands obedience, it's easy to interpret those voices as the creature communicating with you. It's easy to believe that the creature has chosen you. It's easy to believe that you must obey. Anissa Weier's depression and borderline personality disorder created a desperate need for purpose and belonging. The Slenderman mythos provided that. It provided a narrative in which she and Morgan were special, in which they had been chosen, in which they had a destiny and a purpose. For a lonely, depressed teenager, that's a powerful draw. And the online communities around Slenderman reinforced these beliefs. When Morgan and Anissa discussed their beliefs about Slenderman in online spaces, other people in those communities validated those beliefs. They shared their own stories, they encouraged the mythology, they created an echo chamber where the belief in Slenderman's reality was reinforced again and again. The Waukesha stabbing was not an isolated incident. In the years following, there were other incidents linked to Slenderman obsession. In August 2014, just 3 months after the Waukesha stabbing, a teenager in Florida attempted to stab another student, citing Slenderman as the reason. The attack was prevented by teachers who intervened. In September 2014, a girl in Ohio set a fire in her home, claiming that Slenderman had told her to do it. The fire caused significant damage, but no one was seriously injured. In November 2014, a teenager in Nebraska stabbed her grandmother multiple times, claiming that she was possessed by Slenderman and that he had demanded the violence. In each case, the perpetrator was deeply immersed in Slenderman mythology. In each case, the perpetrator had pre-existing mental health issues that made them susceptible to losing touch with reality. In each case, the fictional narrative of Slenderman had provided a framework for acting out violent impulses. The fictional creature had become real in their minds, real enough to justify violence. Slenderman had become real, not as an actual entity that existed in the physical world, but as a psychological force, as a belief system, as a narrative that vulnerable people could use to justify violence, as a framework through which mentally ill individuals could interpret their symptoms. The Slenderman case forced a reckoning with how we think about internet culture, about fiction, about the impact of immersive narratives on vulnerable minds. It raised questions about responsibility. Who was responsible for what happened to Payton Leutner? Was it Morgan and Anissa alone, bearing full responsibility for their actions? Was it their parents who had allowed them unsupervised internet access and hadn't noticed the warning signs of obsession? Was it the creators of Slenderman mythology who had created a fictional narrative so compelling that vulnerable people believed it was real? Was it the online communities that encouraged obsession and reinforced beliefs in Slenderman's reality? Was it YouTube and the algorithms that recommended Slenderman content to younger and younger viewers? Was it the culture of the internet itself, which treats fiction and reality as interchangeable? The answer is that responsibility is diffuse. It involves all of these factors and more. But the case made one thing abundantly clear: fiction matters. The stories we tell matter, the narratives we create matter, and when those narratives are immersive enough, when they're compelling enough, when they're reinforced by online communities and social media algorithms, when they're consumed by vulnerable individuals at critical periods of their development, they can influence behavior, they can shape perception, they can become real in the minds of people who are vulnerable to losing touch with reality. Victor Surge, the original creator of Slenderman, has expressed deep remorse about what happened. He has given interviews discussing his responsibility in creating the character. He has said that he created Slenderman as a fictional exercise. He created it as a creative challenge. He never intended for it to inspire violence. He never intended for it to be taken seriously. But the genie was out of the bottle. Slenderman had become something larger than fiction. He had become a cultural force. He had become real in the minds of millions of people. In the years since the Waukesha stabbing, Slenderman has continued to evolve. New stories have been created, new creators have added to the mythology, new video games have been made, new films have been produced, new generations of young people have become immersed in Slenderman lore. This phenomenon hasn't died. If anything, it has become more entrenched in internet culture, but the case remains a cautionary tale, a reminder that fiction and reality exist on a spectrum, that the line between them is far more permeable than we often think, that stories matter, that narratives have power, that the content we consume, particularly as teenagers and young people, shapes how we understand the world and our place in it. The question of Slenderman's reality becomes even more complex when you consider the nature of fiction itself. Is Slenderman real? Objectively, no. He does not exist in the physical world. He cannot be measured or observed. He does not follow the laws of physics or biology. But in another sense, Slenderman is real. He exists as a cultural artifact. He exists in the minds of millions of people. He exists as a shared narrative that influences how people think and behave. He exists as a force that has inspired art and creativity. He exists as a presence that has shaped internet culture. He exists as a phenomenon that has had real-world consequences. The Slenderman case teaches us something crucial about the modern world. It teaches us that we live in an age where fiction and reality are constantly blending, where narratives created in bedrooms and basements by anonymous internet users can spread to millions of people in a matter of weeks, where immersive, fictional universes can feel as real as physical reality, where vulnerable people can lose the distinction between what is imagined and what is actual, where the content we consume online can become more real to us than the physical world around us. It teaches us that we need to be more thoughtful about the stories we tell, more aware of how those stories might impact vulnerable individuals, more conscious of the power of narrative in shaping perception and behavior, more aware of how online communities can create echo chambers that reinforce false beliefs. It teaches us that mental health matters, that untreated mental illness can be dangerous, that we need better access to mental health resources, particularly for young people, that we need to recognize the warning signs of mental illness, obsession, disconnection from reality, isolation, suicidal ideation, and intervene before tragedy occurs. It teaches us about parental responsibility, about the need for parents to be aware of what their children are consuming online, about the need to monitor internet usage, particularly for children showing signs of mental health struggles or obsessive behavior, about the need to have open conversations with children about the difference between fiction and reality. It teaches us about the responsibility of content creators, about the need to be thoughtful about the content we create, about the need to consider how our stories might impact vulnerable individuals, about the need to add context and warnings when content might be particularly impactful, and it teaches us that monsters, the real ones, are not the ones we should be afraid of. The real monsters are obsession, delusion, mental illness left untreated, the loss of touch with reality, the ability of narratives to override reason and compassion, the failure of society to recognize and help vulnerable individuals. Slenderman is not real. He will never be real. But what happened in Waukesha, Wisconsin on May 31st, 2014 was very real. Payton Leutner's wounds were real. Her trauma was real. Morgan and Anissa's actions were real. The consequences have been real. And that's what should give us pause. That's what should make us think about the stories we tell, about the narratives we create, about the impact those narratives have on vulnerable minds. That's what should make us more thoughtful about how we consume fiction, about how we engage with online communities, about how we treat mental illness, about how we support the vulnerable people in our lives. Thank you for watching. If this video unsettled you, if it made you think about the power of fiction and narrative, if it made you consider your own relationship with internet culture and online communities, then it's done what it was meant to do. Remind you that the line between imagination and reality is far thinner than we often believe, and that the stories we tell matter more than we know. If you've been affected by the themes in this video, if you're struggling with distinguishing between fiction and reality, if you're experiencing mental health symptoms like hearing voices or experiencing delusions, please reach out to someone you trust. Please talk to a mental health professional. Please remember that help is available. You are not alone, and your life has value. If you know someone who seems to be becoming obsessed with fictional narratives, who seems to be losing touch with reality, who seems to be withdrawing from reality in unhealthy ways, please reach out to them. Please encourage them to seek help. Please report concerning behavior to appropriate authorities if you believe someone is in danger. And if you've heard other stories about the intersection of internet culture and real violence, share them in the comments below. Help us understand this phenomenon better. But be aware that discussing these topics, engaging with these narratives can be triggering for some. So please be respectful and thoughtful. If you want to learn more about the Slenderman case, there are excellent documentaries available. HBO produced a documentary called Beware the Slenderman that provides a comprehensive look at the case. It's worth watching to understand the full complexity of what happened. And if you want to learn more about mental health, about the warning signs of serious mental illness, about how to get help, organizations like the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, provide excellent resources. Thank you for watching. Stay safe out there. And remember, the stories we tell matter. Use that power responsibly. Sweet dreams.